I was with a friend of mine during high school, so this was about 3 years ago now. I was visiting a friend of mine in Korea for the summer. We had stayed out for the night because it was a Friday. We were sitting on this park bench, I remember, and we saw this kid walk by with a box of fried chicken in his hands. He sat down just a few benches away, and we ignored him until we started to leave. As we got up to go, though, and leave that small park, we saw him drop an unfinished piece of fried chicken on the ground and start to walk our way. We brushed it off at first. Maybe he had to go in this direction, and maybe he was really lazy and didn't want to throw his stuff away properly. With that, we started walking away. We crossed a road, and as we did so, we saw that he was now on the other side. We would have just ignored it again, had he not given us this weird smile and wave. I asked my friend if she knew him, but she also seemed really confused about the situation. At this point, we assumed he was just being a creep for kicks or perhaps was some kind of stalker. We gave a little awkward wave back before turning around and walking at a faster pace. We went a few blocks before going into a coffee house. We were still a bit wary about this child, but we doubted he would actually follow us this far. Boy, were we wrong. We watched through the window as he turned a small corner and followed the street towards us. My friend scares easily, so she told me she wanted to go to the bathroom right now. To explain the Korean bathroom situation, most public food areas or cafes are attached to larger buildings, and to get to the bathroom you have to leave the cafe through a door within it and then go out into the hallway. While I calmed my friend down in the bathroom, it suddenly happened. The lights turned out, the door was kicked open, and we were pushed into a stall. I could feel hands groping my hair, and another completely covered over my mouth. It didn't matter though. I was far too terrified and startled to scream. I could feel something cold press against my throat. I could hear my friend's gasps of pain. I thought I was going to be killed or raped by this psycho little kid. But then he suddenly stopped. He leaned into my ear and whispered, "Wrong one," before running out of the bathroom. We were left there in the dark, unable to grasp what had just happened to us, and even now I'm haunted by nightmares of what that boy could have possibly meant or possibly been trying to do to us. My New Year's resolution of 2012 was to get back in shape again. After my first kid was born, I sorta lost my athletic interest, but I had every intention of getting it back one day. Eventually, I started running 4 days a week with my friend Hannah, who was a great runner and motivator as well. We would run together after work, about 5 to 10 kilometers, usually favoring the forest trail. It was the kind of trail that got lighting in the darker months of the year, so you can run there any time really. Once you turn on the lights, you get about 45 minutes to run the shorter trails, and a bit longer to run the longer ones. Then the lights shut off by themselves automatically. We had been running for about 2 months there, when we started seeing the same man hanging around the parking lot every time we arrived. He was a very thin man, 25 to 30 years of age, I believe, always dressed in sports clothes but never actually running or exercising at all. He would never look us in the eye either. We speculated at first that he could be a homeless person just camping innocently nearby, because he was constantly there. We got very used to seeing him actually, sitting somewhere close by, silently and always on his own. Actually, we felt somewhat sorry for him. He never seemed to talk to anyone or bother anybody at all, but there was something about him that made us hesitate to reach out or ask if he was okay. I can't exactly pinpoint what it was specifically, but something just didn't seem completely right with him. One evening, Hannah couldn't make it to our run, so I decided to go out on my own. I arrived at the parking lot, my car being the only one there. I did some stretching to warm up, turned on the lights, and set off on the shorter 5-kilometer trail. I hadn't seen the thin, silent man there when I started my run, Perhaps it was finally getting too cold to sit there now that it was autumn, dark and getting closer to the freezing point. He must have been there though, somewhere hidden in the shadows, because as soon as I got to the top of the first steep hill, I could hear heavy breathing somewhere behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, only to see him there. He was running like a man possessed. In regular shoes, mind you, not running shoes either. His arms were moving in this really strange, stiff manner, as if he were made out of metal, his hands straight like arrows, in an upward-inward angle, sort of like a sprinter but much more extreme, like a robot in live motion. For the very first time ever, he looked me dead in the eyes. I could see the eyes of a predatory animal, and it made my heart freeze in that moment. He had never done anything to harm or bother me, or anyone else as far as I knew. But I could see from the look in his eyes alone that I was now facing a serious threat. I started running even faster, trying to create distance between us. I could hear his heavy breathing getting even more strained from the effort. I ran like my life depended on it, adrenaline pumping through my entire body and giving me a brand new source of strength. I tore off my necklace and threw it on the ground. I thought that I had to leave a trace if he took me. Something had to be left behind to know I was there. I tried screaming out as well, hoping someone would be close enough to hear me, but I couldn't scream my lungs out and keep up the phase of running at the same time. Why was he doing this? What did he want? Who exactly was this guy? All these thoughts rushed through my head as I felt my lungs start to burn heavily. Then I thought of my 15-month-old daughter, and I ran so hard I could taste blood in my mouth. The man was still behind me though, maybe 100 meters behind now. I figured though that if I tripped and fell at all or ran out of energy at any point, even fumbled with my car keys once I reached the lot, then I was completely screwed. Once I reached the sharp turn on the trail, I went off the trail and ran straight off into the dark woods. I ran only a short distance, and then I laid down flat on my stomach in some foliage, my hands searching for a rock to defend myself if he managed to find me. I realized in that moment that I was wearing bright running clothes with reflexes and neon coloring. I had never felt so visible in the dark before. I could hear him reach the turn, but thank God he kept on running. I started to slowly and silently as possible move further out into the darkness. My heart sank again though, as I soon heard rapid footsteps closing in from the trail. He must have realized I had gone off trail once he saw there was no sign of me ahead. He stopped and I stopped as well. I could imagine him listening for any single sound. I held my breath in and begged a God I didn't even believe in to make him go away. After a while of this stealthy stalemate, I heard him say something in a language I didn't understand and walk off. I didn't move. I feared he would wait for me by my car and realized I had to get off the trail and onto the main road and stop someone. I couldn't just go back to the parking lot by myself. I started to make my way further into the woods, knowing that I would eventually end up on the last part of the long trail and close to the main road. The lights on the trail then suddenly shut off. That made me a bit calmer at first. The dark was a comfort and protection. But then, after only a few moments, the lights switched on once again. Now this could have meant that another person had just started their run, and soon I would have someone there to help me. Or it could mean that the man was once again searching for me, or getting ready to prey on another lonely runner. I decided it was against my best interest to wait to find out. I continued my way towards the main road. It was extremely dark, and I fell down multiple times, my clothes getting soaked from the damp vegetation. I started to get really cold as well. After what felt like a lifetime, I could see the 10-kilometer trail ahead and knew I must be close to the main road. Soon after that, I could hear the bustling traffic as well. Once I made it to the road, I must have looked like I had been in a horrible accident. I had blood all over from several small cuts from falling. My clothes were extremely dirty, and my face, I assume, was petrified. My bright runner's shirt soon attracted the attention of a passing car. My waving and desperate shouting made it stop by me. The driver was a 40-ish man with his 2 kids in the back seat and spent the next 10 minutes or so trying to make sense of what I tried to say between all the sobbing and crying. He asked if I wanted a lift back to the parking lot. I told him no. Please take me home instead. At home, my husband insisted on going back to retrieve the car and calling the police. To that I asked, and report what? No crime had technically been committed. I just knew that he was out to get me. My husband did go back for the car. The driver's seat window was smashed in, and my phone had disappeared as well. The person who took those had also taken a photo of my daughter that I had hanging from the mirror. I don't know what he was trying to do or why he chased me the way he did, but the look in his eyes, there was no doubt he had bad intentions for me that night. This is a story from when I was 18 years old. I'm 25 now for reference. My mom and I were regular attendees of our local church. We both attended different midweek groups though. I went to the one with some of the younger people, and my mom went to the one with some of the more middle-aged groups of people. Anyway, my mom's group was about half a mile from our house. We didn't own a car at the time, so she would often walk there all by herself for the 7:30 start. This was fine in summers though, because it wouldn't get dark until around 9-ish or perhaps even after that. When her group ended at around 10, she would call me up and I would start walking/running to meet her, and then we'd walk home together. We would usually meet up not too far away from her group, but we would always stay on the phone together until we met up. On the night in question, everything was going as usual. She called, I slipped my trainers on and locked the house, and began jogging off to meet her. I usually ran because it was good training for my rugby, and despite being a big guy, 6'2" and about 290 pounds at the time, I had a very overactive imagination and got very spooked out by any darkness or shadows. In order to meet up with my mom, I had to cross our local park and go through an extremely dark patch of trees behind some of the local houses. It was usually just before this area that we'd meet up. Anyway, I'm running, my mom's walking. We're talking about her evening and who was there when she suddenly says to me in an urgent tone, "Joe, hurry up, I think someone's following me." My heart rate went through the roof and I started to panic. I started full-on sprinting, still with quite a ways to go until I met up with her. I told her to stay calm best she could and kept her updated on my position. My mom is a very tough chick, thick-set, strong, but also very short. I could hear my mom screaming through the phone, and also I could hear it in the distance ahead as well. "Get the fuck away from me! What do you want? I don't have any money. You can have my phone if you want it." I had only ever heard her swear once before, when I had really pushed her and been extremely rude. This panicked me even more. I began full-on sprinting like I'd never run before or ever since. The distance I had to cover usually took me a good 45 to 60 seconds to run, but I did so in more like 20. It's amazing how your body has this whole other level of physical exertion it can reach into when adrenaline finally kicks in. By now, I could see 2 people in the distance. My mom's screams were piercing through me. I could see a man had grabbed her by the hair and was dragging her away. She was fighting him desperately all the way. I screamed, "Get the fuck off my mom!" I charged in. He was tall and lean, but he had hardly any weight to him. What happened next was something of a blur. Only through me and my mom talking about it have we come to some conclusion on what really happened. Besides the guy's injuries, of course. He saw this hulk of a man charging him and immediately let go of her. She fell to the ground sobbing and tried to run away. I caught the man fairly easily, and I brought him down to the ground extremely hard. My mom told me that in my blind rage I swept him clean off the ground and smashed his head directly into it. He grunted and we rolled around, and I began to savagely beat him. In rugby, when you tackle someone, you have to be quick onto your feet, so you can challenge for the ball and try to win for your team. I had completely blacked out in rage, but apparently I hopped over the man, head-butted him, and repeatedly started slamming his face into the ground. Someone from the houses behind had heard all the screams and called the police. One guy on the street happened to be a policeman and came out to investigate. I remember he had to drag me off the guy. It was 10 or so. I could see the blood and scratch marks on my arms. He had clawed at me, but I didn't notice a single moment of it. The police arrived very quickly, and we had to be interviewed by them, which was all a bit blurry. Apparently, I was beating the man so badly the off-duty copper had thought I was the attacker at first. I suppose anyone would have, seeing me beat his ass that bad. The guy was on their records as a thief. He had mugged a girl in town not that long before. When police interviewed him, he claimed he was just robbing her, but I'm not so sure. He's in prison now, thankfully. I had never been so scared in my life. I had always imagined situations like this, where I was the hero saving someone, but I always wondered if I would be able to react when that real moment came. Thankfully, I was able, and thankfully I've never had to since. It just makes me so glad to know that I was being a good son to my mom and meeting up with her, even though I never really wanted to and personally never saw the need. You never think this kind of bad stuff will happen to the ones you love, until it finally does. So I have a friend who's just recently been getting into these entitled parents type stories. We eventually started talking about them and would laugh at the sheer stupidity of Darwin's failed experiments, at least up until last week. She began to get more and more quiet, and when I finally pressed her on the issue, she revealed that she'd been coming across some of the stories of attempted kidnapping, and they reminded her of a night many years ago. She's never made an account to share, so she asked if I could post in her stead. After telling me what happened, we both still can't come to a consensus on whether it's the creepiest thing or not, but it's a story that if someone would ever find themselves in a similar situation, we hope they'll get some ideas on how to protect themselves. Many moons ago in the early 2000s, my friend Sarah was going to the local state college. Now, while the college was in the city, she lived out in the county with her father and would use the bus system to go to and from school. One afternoon after class, her and her friends went to one of their apartments to study for some upcoming exams. Well, being the young and responsible young adults they were, they studied for all of about 10 minutes before things turned into a much more festive gathering. After a few hours, Sarah happened to glance up at the clock, which caused her mind to snap back into place. "Hey, dumbass, what time does the last bus run?" Screaming profanities and prayers warding off her demise by her father, she quickly ran down to the bus stop, just in time to catch the very final trip of the night. With a huge sigh of relief, she flopped down into a seat in the back and threw her headphones on right away. She was lost in thoughts of what elaborate tales to tell her father to not get in trouble. She hadn't noticed a little boy walking straight up to her until she noticed a tiny movement out of the corner of her eye as he sat down right next to her. She somehow managed to not recoil at the sight of the child, because while the child was completely filthy and reminded her of someone straight from Deliverance, it was his creepy smile she remembered the most. He just sat there, smiling at her, until she slowly slid her headphones down and the following interaction began. "Hello? Hello. You're very pretty." "Well, thank you. What's your name?" Now, Sarah had this policy of never giving any personal info to stranger. But hey, kids are usually harmless, right? Every alarm was going off in her head, though. "My name's Katie." "Oh, that's a nice name." The kid then just sat there smiling at her. After a few minutes of this, the kid finally said, "You would make such a great mom." He hopped down and walked back to an even more dirty and unkempt monster of a man, who she could only assume was the boy's father. Just like his son, he was staring her down intensely. When she looked over at him, he just nodded politely and kept on smiling. She put her headphones back on and dug out a book to pretend to study, but she kept glancing back and noticed both of them staring at her the entire time. As each stop came up one by one and went by, she prayed they would get off the bus. As the bus soon began to empty of other passengers, though, she found it was now just her, some middle-aged woman, and those two people. The bus was beginning to slow for its next stop in a small town that had a series of restaurants. She couldn't take them anymore at that point and decided it would be safer for her to go down to Mickey D's and wait for her father than to sit on that bus alone with them any longer. She gathered up her things and prepared to disembark. As she allowed the woman to pass by, she noticed the men now gathering up their things as well. Oh hell no, she thought, but she didn't want to make it out like she was trying to avoid them. She moved to the seat near the front and sat back down. To her horror, she watched as the man and his son took another seat and sat back down as well, now staring at her with a sinister smile and nodding. Her anxiety was through the roof at this point. She watched even more stops come and go, until finally her stop was coming up. What could she possibly do in this situation? Her mind raced. As the bus came to her stop, she gathered up her things again and watched in horror as the men gathered up their things too. Instead of getting off, she sat down behind the driver and began to speak to them. Hey, how much further till the end of the line? 3 more stops. Sarah then leaned in and told the driver about the man and his son and asked if it was possible to have the police there when they arrived. The driver looked into the mirror at the two people and then told her he'd take care of everything. Sarah glanced back. Her heart jumped into her throat as while the little boy was smiling at her, the father now was not. She described it as the look a parent would give their child when they'd done something wrong. Sarah was usually a very strong individual, but she was in tears as she took out her phone and tried to call her father, straight to voicemail. Who else could she call for help in this moment? Finally, she reached out to her ex. He may have been a disloyal piece of shit when it came to affairs of the heart, but she could always rely on him for other things when it counted the most. Thankfully, he picked up. As quietly as she could, she poured her heart out about what was happening and asked if he could please meet them at the last stop. I'm at Rogers right now. It's 20 minutes away, but I'll try to rush as fast as I can. Please, hurry, she begged. Finally, they came over the hill to where the final stop was. Frantically, she looked for something, anything she could use to help her, but there was nothing. Finally, the bus pulled in and the door swung open. The man glared down at her, waiting for her to get off first. Hold up, miss. I need to talk to you for a moment about your bus pass. The man stood there for a moment until the driver told him this was the very last stop and he needed to get off the bus now. I'm waiting for my... Sir, you need to get off right now. If you're waiting for her, she'll be along shortly, but I need you to leave. Angrily, the man stomped off with his child in tow. As soon as they got off, the driver shut the door right away. Hey, what the... The man began yelling and banging on the door. Sarah was scared he was going to break the glass until she noticed 2 police cars rolling in, followed shortly by the little piece of crap Jack drove. The police ordered the man away from the bus, and she couldn't hear what else was being said. Jack later revealed the man was claiming Sarah was his daughter, and he was only taking her home. Once Jack asked him her name, though, he said it was Katie, and that was all she wrote. In the end, the man got into a fight with Jack and the officers, but he was easily overwhelmed and arrested. When she got home and told her father what happened, he tossed her the keys to his old '82 Ram, and she never had to ride the bus again. While it was loud and a pain to drive, she never felt safer. She did ride the bus one final time after that, though, when she delivered a big plate of cookies to the driver, who had saved her life that day. I happen to be a cosplayer. I'm not exactly famous, but I am well known enough in my city that I'm recognized every once in a while. I wrote a while back about 3 men on a train who tried to attack me. I very rarely take the train unaccompanied now because of this, but sometimes I have to. I'd much prefer to be able to drive everywhere, but parking in my city is one of the most expensive in all of Canada. I'm a freelance photographer by profession, and I can't always afford to pay $30 for just a couple of hours downtown. This means instead I now take the train. My boyfriend had stayed at a friend's the night before and would be meeting me on the other side of town to take me to the photo shoot. I was dressed as Misa Amane from Death Note. I was taking the train to meet up with the cosplayer who would be playing Light. I was dressed as Misa, but I was wearing a coat over my outfit and regular shoes as well. Besides my big false lashes and the helm of my pleather skirt, there was nothing to indicate at all I was cosplaying. It was about 5:30 a.m. at this time. We were driving to the next town over for the shoot, so we had to get started early. It was a Saturday morning, so most of the people on the train were those heading home from an overnight shift. I actually really liked these early hours, because usually no one would ever give me a hard time, or really even interact with me at all. Every once in a while, though. I had to ride from the second to last stop in the northwest all the way to a station in the southwest, so the train crossed about half the city. A man got on at the downtown station, about 6 stops until I had to get off myself. The Light cosplayer had texted me saying he had arrived there a bit early. Though there were many empty seats, this man sat directly across from me. "Hey," he looked up and said. I hadn't had any coffee yet and wasn't really up for conversation, so I didn't respond. I pretended to not be able to hear him and kept on scrolling through Facebook. "Hey, I'm talking to you." I glanced up at him. "You are really pretty," he said. I didn't respond verbally. I just nodded slightly to acknowledge I'd heard him and went back to my business. To be honest, I know I'm somewhat attractive. I'm not skinny or super fit or anything like that, though I did lose a lot of weight, so I'm not overly heavy anymore. This gave me some attractive features as well. I'm used to people just idly saying things like this, especially when I've done up my makeup heavily for a photo shoot. "Hey, did you hear me? I said you're pretty. You look really fucking hot." His voice was now very irritated. "I heard you. Yeah, sure, I'm pretty," I responded. I was feeling extremely irritable before he'd even started talking to me, lack of coffee and all, and I really didn't feel like him stating something that was true needed to be thanked. "You're not that pretty," he snarled. "Vain bitches like you should be taught a lesson." I've gotten that reaction a lot before from people, usually from people online or from catcallers. There's an idea some people seem to have that you're only what they say you are. They don't want women to know they're beautiful unless a man says they are. I rolled my eyes and just went back to doing my own thing. 4 stops left now. I knew that after the next stop there would be a long portion through a tunnel. The lights were on in the train, so I wasn't particularly worried about him doing anything scary. And then he said this. "You know, I should cut that pretty little face of yours." A few other passengers looked up at this point. The guy was speaking loudly, and I was a bit nervous now. 3 stops left. A few more people got onto the train, the last stop downtown. The guy leaned in towards me and put his hands together and whispered, "I'm going to fuck you up if you dare get off this train." After my last horrifying experience being attacked, this made me really nervous. The guy cosplaying as Light didn't have a car, so we'd be walking to the mall 10 minutes away to wait for my boyfriend. The guy playing Light was also not a particularly big guy. He was an inch shorter than me, actually. "Oh yeah? Fight me," I said quietly. I don't know why, but I have a tendency to act real stupid and tough when I'm scared. This guy was way bigger than me and could probably easily kill me with very little difficulty. It was now 5:45 a.m. though, and I was extremely grouchy and hadn't had coffee. Alright, I'm gonna break your neck and fuck your face," he said loudly. We were passing through the tunnel now. The train was always very loud in the tunnels. I don't think any other passengers could hear him say this. We got out and approached the next stop. This was the very last one before I'd have to depart. At the stop, almost everyone else got off. Beside me and the guy threatening me, there were now only 2 other people on the train, a big guy with headphones on, and a little older lady. "Back off, man, my boyfriend is waiting for me at the station." I lied. I wish I'd chosen to sit nearby a door. I was scared that if I tried to get up to the emergency call button, he'd attack me. "Boyfriend? No one would want a fat fuck like you." "Don't worry though, I like 'em fat." I'm 150 pounds, 5'6". I was slightly overweight, but I had started working out and developed healthy eating habits as well. My doctor wasn't worried at the least. "Thistle," I heard someone say loudly. It was that big guy with the headphones. Thistle was the name I used when I was cosplaying. "Yo, I thought that was you. What are you doing up so early?" He walked over to where I was sitting and sat down right next to me. I didn't recognize him, but I realized he'd heard what the guy said to me and was now coming to my aid. "Oh, just meeting up with some friends." I tried to keep my voice cheerful. I was careful to avoid looking at the guy across from us. "Oh, nice. I'm just getting off work myself. Where are you getting off?" On the next stop," I replied. "Oh, no kidding, dude. Me too. How about I get off with you?" The guy across from us now leaned back in his seat, though now he was glaring heavily at us. When we got to the next stop, the big guy got off the train with me. We met up with my friend and he walked us all the way to the mall. The creepy guy did follow us for a few blocks, but then he disappeared after it became clear he was heavily outnumbered. I was still afraid though, so the big guy even waited with us until my boyfriend arrived. We wound up giving him a lift home, because his stop was actually about 5 further down the line. I don't know if the creep on the train would have actually hurt me, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out due to that kind stranger that day. This happened a few months ago in the McDonald's at Copenhagen Station. I'm not Danish, only visiting the country for one day. Since I wanted to travel cheaply, I decided to take the cheapest bus there was, which just so happened to be the one arriving at 11 p.m. the day before. I thought I could save even more money by just not renting a bed somewhere, and instead spending the night awake or half asleep at the station. I'd do my business the next day and sleep long and well on the bus back home. This McDonald's was open 24/7. Pretty early on, I discovered that the station was far too cold for me to get some good shut-eye, so I went inside and bought a cup of coffee and sat down at an empty table. Plenty of lighting and semi-drunk people to keep me awake. At least, that's what I thought. I should add I'm 23 and female. After a while of sitting in this spot, a strange man walked over to me and placed a cup of soda on my table. In Danish, he said something that I believe meant, "I ate my food already. I didn't drink any, so you can have this instead if you want it." I'm Swedish, and though some Swedes understand Danish perfectly well, I have some difficulties doing so. Anyway, I really didn't pay that much attention to the cup after it was put down on my table. I just wrote it off as a random drunk trying to flirt with me or something. But I noticed that in front of me, just a table away, sat another man, and he was now watching me very closely. We even locked eyes the times I looked up to take a peek at him. This creeped me out intensely. I didn't like being watched like this. He sat there for nearly an hour, even though he had no food in front of him and was not talking to anybody either. In the end, he just suddenly stood up and walked over to me. I cursed internally, thinking I'd now have to defend myself and tell him to leave. He turned though, and there stood the guy who had initially left the cup of soda on my table. He told the soda guy to leave after pushing the cup back into his arms and said he didn't want to see him anywhere near this place again. The man who had been watching me turned to me and explained in English that the man with the soda had walked by my table several times while I hadn't noticed, glancing at me and the cup, probably waiting for me to take a drink. The man had actually finished his meal quite a while ago, but he stayed just to watch over to me. He had to leave though in that moment and reminded me to be very careful. I hadn't even noticed the soda guy supposedly pacing by. I was too fixated on this other dude, who just so happened to actually be the good guy watching over me. Who knows what the man had put into that soda, and what would have happened should I have gotten really thirsty or something and decided to take a sip. This story just happened a few years back when I was visiting an old friend in Cologne while at the same time taking advantage of him as a free stay for a meeting with my LARP group. For those of you who don't quite understand what LARPing is, it's basically real-life role-playing. Imagine a D&D game, but instead of people sitting around a table playing with dice, you actually dress up as the characters and role-play in real life. LARPing has been my hobby since I was just 14 years old, and after I got a job that paid pretty well, I started to go a bit more all out when it came to stuff for my hobby. One of those things I spent a solid amount of money on was my character's armor, very important for this story. It was chainmail that I would wear underneath my outer armor. After the meeting of my group, I would mostly get out of my LARP outfit. I really didn't want to have to walk through the dangerous parts of the city dressed up as a medieval knight. Since I couldn't fit it all on my person though, I would keep my chainmail on, as well as my tunic and pants. On my bus ride home, I noticed some guy seemed to have gotten a stink eye on me. I simply guessed it was because I still looked very out of place. When he got off on the same station as me, I didn't really pay him much attention. I was almost to my friend's place already and decided to call him up, asking if we should meet up and go somewhere. He agreed before I'd even ended my question. I arrived at our meeting spot and waited. I noticed that the man from the bus now walked straight towards me and was following me as well. I got closer to the wall to make some space, but he didn't pass me by. Instead, he stopped just before me and pulled a knife on me, demanding my bag, wallet, and phone. I was willing to give him my wallet, but I tried to explain that the bag only had some armor and foam weapons. It seemed that even just talking was enough to set this guy off. Suddenly, I felt two fast, stinging punches to my stomach. It hurt like hell. I dropped down and the guy grabbed my bag. Honestly, the next things are not really in my mind. I was barely able to notice anything, other than a voice in my head screaming at me, "Dude, you just got stabbed!" The next thing I noticed was my friend shaking me. My bag was open and stuff was all over the place. He was holding my helmet with blood on it, as he said he'd seen the guy throwing my stuff around after the bag was most likely too heavy for him to carry. My friend, seeing me on the floor, managed to grab the first thing he could, which was my helmet. He beat the guy's face in with it until he ran away. Later, we checked my stomach to see the damage. Even though I had two giant deep blue bruises which hurt like a bitch, I still only had very small cuts, since the chainmail had actually stopped the knife attack. To this day, I still get sick to the stomach when I think back on that day. If I had simply not worn a piece of my LARP clothing that day, I would be dead, literally killed over a bag full of costumes, 150 euros in my wallet, and a 10-year-old phone. What a fucked up place the world is. The experience I'm now going to share scared the absolute shit out of me. This happened almost 8 years ago, when I was 20 years old. Sometimes I still wonder just what the hell was going on. My best friend and I were both in a bit of a bind and looking for a place to move into ASAP. We managed to find this basement apartment very close to downtown. It was a complete and total shithole, but at least it was a 2-bedroom for $650, which made it well worth it for a while until we could find a better place. A few days after moving in though, I started having these really bad nightmares and waking up completely terrified. I could never remember what it was I dreamed about though. After about a week of this, every time I was in my room, I would feel like someone was going to burst through my wall and kill me. The landlord had a storage he could access on the other side of my bedroom wall. Since my room was bigger and my friend's room was more like a closet, she decided to move into my room with me. After this, I started noticing that when I went into the backyard at night to let the dog go for a quick piss, it always looked like someone on the top floor of the house was watching me. My roommate noticed this too when she came out with me. Me and my friend also had a mutual guy friend that we had met through. The three of us were pretty much always hanging out, and he stayed over quite frequently. One night we were all out and about, and after a while he decided to go home on his own. My roommate and I stayed out a few hours until about 3-ish. Realizing we were likely to sleep in, we went to bring the dog out before going to bed once we arrived back home. I had my dog on her leash, so she wouldn't give me any monkey business when I wanted her to come in. I couldn't quite understand what was happening in the moment, but standing by the door, I started to see what seemed like shadows of people approaching towards me and my roommate. I don't know what came over me in that moment, but I screamed, "Get in the house now!" My roommate was very startled, of course. Thankfully though, she listened to me, and me, her, and the dog booked it back into the house. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, we could see these red eyes peering into the shitty little windows we had. I screamed my face off, yelling out for my friend that went home earlier. My roommate's cell phone rung. It was our buddy. Not sure why, but he just had a feeling he should call in that moment. We had him book his ass over to our house. He stayed over almost every night for 2 weeks until we moved the hell out of there. I don't know why, but my roommate and I always had a suspicion the landlord/upstairs resident had something to do with all these uneasy happenings. Make what you will of this, but it scared the ever-living crap out of me. 8 years later, and I still get the heebie-jeebies when I happen to pass that house on the streetcar.